Welcome to the Power Curve. I'm Holly Scott. In our podcast, I have the pleasure of chatting with accomplished industry executives regarding their career path and aspirations to the C-suite, with the idea of empowering you, our audience, as you navigate your own career trajectory. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of chatting with accomplished CEO, Jay Srinivasan. Welcome, Jay.
Thanks a lot, Holly. It's great to finally connect after all these years. And for all the listeners, I want to say, my first break in healthcare was courtesy you. So it's great to finally chat.
It is really neat to see the planets aligned where we're in the seats that we are and having the conversation that we're having today. I was really looking forward to this one. Yes, as Jay alluded to, he was one of the very first software engineers that I placed way back when. And we had quite a story associated with it, which I'm sure we'll dive further into. But what's really unique about Jay is along the way from his early days and his and grit and determination, he has made himself, he's accomplished so much across many companies and many functions. And I'm excited to hear more about it because I know you have some real nuggets of wisdom to share with the audience.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So it all starts to me back with childhood. Career is something that we don't go to college to study, right? We go to college to study something, but we don't really know in many cases how it's going to truly play out. However, I do find that there are ties back to early conversations had with family and such. So I'd love to hear more from you, Jay, about what career meant in your household. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
No, absolutely. So, I would say I've had, perhaps the most privileged upbringing as a child. I grew up in India in a military household. My father was a career military officer, so he was in the Air Force, the Indian Air Force, and my mother was a principal in the local schools, in the different Air Force bases that we were at. So I had the pleasure, luxury, or the privilege of actually being in 7 cities over kindergarten through high school. So, as the adage goes, the only thing constant is change. It's kind of cliche to me because I actually grew up with change all around me. Every state in India has its own language. The cultures are different. It's very vibrant and obviously very diverse. And I had the pleasure of the luxury of actually learning different languages. And so what it did leave me, from a leadership perspective is, culture matters, people matter, relationships matter. And that's kind of been the essence of, my North Star and how I've operated over the years.
Very interesting. So you moved following your father's career then? And your
Yes. So my mother had the flexibility because she, obviously could teach in pretty much any school, and she primarily taught in kind of the Air Force had its own school system that was in place. Actually, the government had its own school system that was in place for all kids that operated around and traveled just like I did. And there are many, most of whom have made their way, to the United States and elsewhere in the world and become accomplished leaders of their own right. And this was the way that, the kind of the central government actually was able to kind of fund and provide for all these families that were getting uprooted, on a annual basis, if not a biannual basis. And so my mother just had the flexibility. My father obviously, would also get stationed in locations where the family couldn't travel, that were considered, secret or otherwise. And so, mom basically was our pillar of support, across those transitions.
Gosh, I can only imagine. How many did you have siblings?
Yes, I do. Actually, I have a sister. She's actually in the States. She's in the Pacific Northwest, and she works for Amazon Health, coincidentally. But she's had an interesting career path that has brought her there, and her background's actually in finance. But we're very close. She's my younger sibling, but when we get together, it's hard to tell who is the older one. in most in most conversations. She rules the roost.
Oh, that's wonderful. Was it something discussed when you were growing up that your did your parents encourage you to eventually move to the US?
It's interesting. So my mother's side of the family has been in the States for more than 60 years. So they've lived, and they've lived in kind of all over the United States, and so has my father's family. The only reason we couldn't move at the young age was because my father was in the military, and the military does have rules about, a transition period between when you're actually an operating officer in in the Air Force versus when you have to get retirement voluntarily to leave the country. And there's kind of there's a soft period, or a no compete period at which, that my father had to avail of. So we stayed back, just because of my father's career, and then at a point when he was ready to kind of retire from the Air Force, we had to wait a certain number of years before he could actually make the move. My mother's side, being in the States, was kind of the natural pull, but I came to school independent of my family's move. I came to grad school in the United States, and I came to Philadelphia to Drexel to study biomedical engineering. And over a couple of years later, my parents actually emigrated to the States.
Hmm. Really fascinating. It's funny. I grew up not wanting to. By the way, my dad was in the Air Force here, the U.S. Air Force. So I
Wow.
moved around and was born in California, but basically lived close to my family my whole life. And I can hardly imagine being more than 5 miles away from them, much less the ocean and everything. So I give you a lot of credit. And those experiences, what you experienced, and I've seen this with many successful executives, when you have that kind of fortitude instilled early, it gives you more of a foundation later on to move forward and be less risk averse and take on new challenges. So that's kudos to your parents for allowing that to grow with you and your sister.
Yeah, no, I think, I would say one thing, Holly, about that is, I grew up, and you learn by observation, I think, and it's the best teaching skill. It's the best, in fact, it's the best parenting skill. It's the best leadership skill. I think it's a soft skill, but when done well, it's probably the most powerful tool you could have as a leader. I learned honesty, integrity, and respect just watching my dad. My dad's a very he's kind of, he's very disciplined. He's obviously extremely thoughtful in how he goes about responding. I mean, the military can be a rough place, as you rise up the ranks. And he learned both tact as well as, the ability to stay true to his North Star. And just watching him, my sister and I just learned inductively, and watching our mother as well, who's always been this constant learner. My parents now live with us, so they live in with us, and we've had that rare privilege of actually observing them both as children and as young and now adults, is watching them kind of really be around us and guide us, always watching, observing, and not very, they don't tend to have big opinions about us. They just let us be who we are, and that's been good for us. And that's how we want our children to grow up as well, surrounded by family, but also brought up with the right moral values.
Mm. Honesty, integrity, and respect. I love that. And I love the fact that those traits are really able to cross any line, whether it's engineering or artistry or anything. If you have those values, you truly can make an impact. And what a beautiful foundation. So you studied biomedical engineering. Did you have interest in that in early education, or when did you start thinking of, because biomedical engineering, you and I are around the same age, right? So we remember that wasn't always a degree of focus. There were mechanical
Absolutely.
engineers, there were systems engineers. So curious how that became on your radar and one of interest.
Yeah, so this is a very interesting story. It's probably a story of failure more than a story of success. So let me tell you a little bit about it. So I grew up in, wanting to be a physician, and a specific type of physician. So, from a very early age, and that was, I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. And, it was the fascination of really cognitive, the cognitive kind of aspects of neurosurgery, plus the fact that I really wanted to change patient lives. That was really what I wanted to do. And I grew up, in India, where you kind of pick your path. So you either want to be an engineer or you want to be a doctor. And I went through all of middle school and high school just wanting to be that. So if you go back and kind of look in that time and that period, there was obviously Robin Cook and all the books written by him. There was Eric Segal, who wrote this great book called Doctors. And there was Arthur Haley, who wrote this book called Strong Medicine, and I must have memorized these books. Like, I knew every like, starting line in the book and every page almost. And I wanted to be a doctor, but I also wanted to go to only a specific school, and that school was the All India Institute of Medical Sciences, which is like the Harvard of Harvard Medical School, or Stanford Medical School in the United States. And it's a little bit of a, it's probably way more selective. They take, the acceptance rate is one of the lowest in the world. At that time, it was, we're talking about 30 students out of perhaps more than 3 million people applying, if not more. And I didn't make it. So I'd already decided that if I wasn't going there, I wasn't going anywhere else. And so I passed on every single medical school and was left with only one choice. I either would have to do my backup, which was to perhaps go and study history or something at Oxford, or really take this offer and go to this top engineering school in my state. And I only did it reluctantly, saying that I'll give it a chance, but I really want to do medicine. And a year into school, I loved it. I loved it because I was doing electrical engineering, and when I saw the fact that electrical engineering and just the foundations of being able to problem solve would eventually hold good, whether I did medicine or I did engineering, I slowly started gravitating towards kind of really seeking out that missing gap, and that was biomedical. Biomedical was very nascent. So when I came to the United States, I picked Drexel primarily because it was a biomedical engineering and science institute. It wasn't actually a department. It was NIH funded, it was NSF funded. And so you had the ability to really do pure and fundamental research. And the faculty was just amazing. Coming to inner city Philadelphia, albeit having grown up in the military, it was tough. Don't get me wrong, the picture of Philadelphia that was sent over when I actually got an email from the school was in summer. I landed in one of the harshest winters in Philadelphia's history, and so needless to say, I did have some shock, but I still love Philadelphia. I still root for the Eagles. I mean, and it's really, biomedical engineering has really kind of been what I wanted to do, and I've realized it's my calling. Changing patient lives, in this day and age, is even more important than before, with growing populations and non-communicable diseases on the rise.
Wow, that's interesting. And as long as I've known you, I didn't have any of that history, so I absolutely love hearing it. And what a walk down memory lane thinking about all those Robin Cook books. I used to love those. I devour those books. They were so fascinating.
Yeah.
Really interesting. All right, so here you are in Philadelphia, and you completed school, and then you started in non-healthcare related consulting, right? So tell us about that. How did you get your first shot in the U.S. workforce?
Yeah, it's interesting. So my parents emigrated to the States around the time I was actually going through grad school. I decided to leave grad school in a hurry, and a little bit of this was personal. I really wanted to be there to support my parents as they made what I thought was a pretty big decision for them. And also, my father grew up with a lot of privilege in the military, and used to authority and so on. And the United States, wasn't easy for him when he first came on. Though he's supremely adaptable, but I decided to leave. And so when I left, I picked the first job that came my way. And what I learned doing that was, most importantly, something I didn't learn when I was in high school. It does not matter what you get. You really got to do what you get to the best of your ability, and you get noticed. And so every job from my first, I started off doing an internship in Hamden, Connecticut, and we were working on voice over IP. Why did I end up doing that when I was a biomed major? Because I was tinkering with computers when computers weren't totally cool yet.
Mm-hmm.
And I was doing it in high school. I did it in college, in university in India. I ran the computer club while I was there. And so I realized that I really wanted to do computers because to me, it was just another language, another way of expression. As an engineer, I never really thought of it as a profession. But given an opportunity to really do something, cool at that time, which was voice activated attendance, I got into that. So this was like the early attempt at really doing speech and kind of speech-based AI, conversational sort of AI, but it was very rudimentary at best. And as I was doing that job, I got this opportunity to work at Kodak. Kodak had just divested the healthcare business, but I ended up working in their print-on-demand facility in a little town called Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, and that's where I realized the value of actually working hard and then being noticed for it. The head of that facility, the the general manager for the facility noticed me, and he was the person who actually recruited me out of the company to think of it that way. He basically wrote my recommendation and asked me to go looking for a role because his comment to me was, Jay, you've outgrown this facility. You need to move on, and I'm going to find you the next role. That next role took me to a company called AMS, which is CGI. And the reason I went to AMS was, again, to kind of really get into a cutting edge aspect of technology, which was really how do you take distributed systems and are able to actually implement, first in class applications in telecom. Um, you know, over the years, one of the things I always talk about is the fact that today's cell phones, it's almost natural to think that you could have a number in Alabama, cross the border and be in Georgia and be able to use it. But going back those years, that wasn't possible. Yeah, the switching on towers were not elegant and you couldn't do it. And I helped write for Bell South the first kind of local number portability application that allowed you to take your cell phone across state borders. And so, nothing to do with biomedical engineering. In fact, nothing to do with anything I'd studied. But it basically introduced me to the fact that problem solving mattered. And I'll tell you how it paid out in the future. But the way it paid out and when I was there was it allowed me to build the notion of setting expectations, meeting expectations, understanding what critical success factors are, and actually delivering product, right? And that's a skill, you don't necessarily need to have a particular, a profession or vertical to be on. You just got to have that skill. And that's what I learned.
Mm-hmm. We that was back in the 90s, and some of the most talented engineers still to this day had that cross functional or cross collaboration experience getting cross industry, I should say, from telecom into medtech and healthcare. We saw an enormous crossover there, only with the brightest of the bright. And I'm saying that not just because I absolutely love you, but because at the time when I was tasked with building the team for Abbott, it was, we need the brightest of the brightest of the brightest. And you had no healthcare experience, yet I still came knocking on your door and I wanted to get to know you. And it was because of what you'd done, but it was after I realized who you were in our conversations. And please take note, especially the young engineers that aspire to grow, the pieces that stood out were his absolute tenacity and commitment to goal, commitment to finishing. You took ownership of things that really weren't asked of you. I mean, in a very respectful way, you showed ambition, you showed that you could step up and you could make things happen. And it was clear from our first conversation that because of that, you had innate leadership attributes that were going to be very valuable as we build out this pretty complex software engineering team at the time, because you were really in a pool. If we look at the competitive landscape of the time, software engineering was becoming hot demand. There were a lot of people going into it from all walks of life, all industries, and to really come to an organization with the expectations and standards of an Abbott, there were it was more than just what you had done. It was more than just the languages you knew, more than just the coding capabilities. It was a lot of these innate characteristics that came with you as an individual, as a leader, that really has brought light to bear. And now here we are, fast forward 25 years later, 20 years later, that has now really manifested itself in the leadership opportunities that you've been able to gather along the way.
Yeah. No, thank you. That's very generous. So I assumed, by the way, when I first got the call from you, that this was going to be an opportunity for me to visit my family. Needless to say, that it ended up being an 8.5 year stint at Abbott, but one that I'm absolutely, I would say it was the most fun I had. I was young. They say software is malleable. So was I at that age, and Abbott offered me the opportunity to really, to really grow. And I moved and worked on more programs than anyone during that time frame. And that opportunity couldn't have been gotten at any other company. Abbott's an interesting company, right? I mean, they're great. They've been around for more than 130 years. They are four companies in one. They serve the entire circle of life, nutrition, pharma, diagnostics, right, and med devices. And the fact that I kind of gravitated, into diagnostics was natural. Diagnostics was the big business at that time. But what I found was that, I really liked complexity. I really liked working, with systems, right? Software engineers, it goes back to leadership, but leadership's all about systems thought. It's all about critical thinking, and it's about making decisions based on the data you have. And really, some are good, some are not good, but they're like your actions, your consequences, right? But software engineering was very useful for me because I got to learn more about the biology, which I understood, but I had to still learn it. I learned a lot about engineering, besides, having trained in electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, really understanding how to build strong systems engineering from folks that Abbott had hired from the military who were really good at systems engineering and systems thought. The great thing about Abbott is that they do recognize talent, right? And they recognize talent real quickly. And a lot of us who, had the opportunity to work can say that, there was no dearth for recognition, as long as you were willing to put in, obviously the time and the energies to kind of shine. A lot of my colleagues have done very well for themselves. They've excelled. They've in the professions. But Abbott is a company that you could retire from, and that's the beauty. There's very few companies in the world today that could retire from. Abbott's one of them, and it speaks to their culture and speaks to their mechanisms to retain people. I chose to leave. And I chose to leave almost on the same whim that I actually came to Abbott. I chose to leave because I felt I needed to go and learn something different. I had learned how Abbott operated. I learned, how to be successful. But, that itch of growing up in the military never went away. And it took me around the industry a fair bit. But no job did I never left a job other than the first one that I did, which was leaving Abbott to go elsewhere, actually looking for the next job. And that's where, Holly, I think, it's a learning for everyone. LinkedIn, is a great tool. I think now it's a tool that I think serves many purposes, but it's a great way of expression. But in the years when I was kind of growing up and early in my career, LinkedIn was still in its infancy. And I would say the best way to find your next job is when someone were to recommend it. And I think referrals is always the best way. I hire people based on referrals. I never really hire based on, the referral could come from you,
Hmm.
as an executive recruiter, can come from ex-colleagues and so on, because I believe referrals carry the human touch.
Hmm.
You never get that gleaning glean that from a resume, and you surely don't glean it from a few hours of interviewing a candidate, be it an individual role or be it a executive role. And so, but I learned that how you perform, you may never know, but people observe you. And it doesn't matter. It holds true to this day, even as a CEO, how you perform, it's beyond the board. Even your people observe you, and they will follow your traits, good or bad. And you really want them focused on the good, not the bad, because you don't want them to inculcate any of those habits that you believe are not good for their growth. As a leader, my goal is everyone shines beyond my wildest imaginations, and excels beyond what I'll ever be able to do. Because if I did that well, then I actually serve the role of being a leader, because I feel leadership's like a university setting. You've got to really make sure your people graduate, no dropouts, and you've got to try very hard to really support them, like teachers do.
It's an excellent perspective. It's a powerful one too. And that leadership, it sounds like you had some pretty strong mentors along the way to implement that way of thinking. And especially coming from an engineering foundation, where were those lessons? Were they learned through hard knocks? Did you have people that you looked at and said, "Boy, I aspire to be a leader like him or her"?
Yeah, that's great. I read a lot. It goes back to, I guess many people have said this, but I buy more books than I read. I can read. I uh, I register for more courses as well than I can take, and it's more aspirational. I just feel like I never get to most of these things, and it's like life gets in the way. But I always want to. Um, Observations being the biggest way I look for leadership skills and traits I want to emulate. And it's imitation's the best form of flattery. And I have imitated a lot of good leaders in terms of how I believe they've conducted themselves. And it started with my dad, my mother, even prior, my grandfather, who's since passed, who is an excellent leader. I mean, he electrified a lot of rural India, southern India, and he was the kind of the incessant teacher. He was, he always he always taught with the notion that everything you learn, is not, you never learn in college. You're never going to get a degree and become a learned person. That was his view. Okay, learning and an education are two different things, and he believed that the strongest leaders would be ones who actually learn and not educated, because not just educated, because he believed that that drives the rigor you need. So observation was important. I had a great leader when I was at Abbott. You know, uh, watching him operate was great. He was extremely respectful of his staff, yet very tough when it came to holding people accountable. He drove a culture at that time that was very buttoned down. He drove a very casual culture. Things that I took, when I went to Beckman, for example, we had a site where we functioned like a startup in Fort Collins. And that site was really an acquisition, and a very contrarian culture relative to the rest of Beckman Coulter. And this leader also taught me one thing. He always could stand up for what he believed was right. And the consequences could be personal for him, but he wouldn't shy away. And so courage to me is one of the most important skills as a leader that one must have, right? You must be able to stand up for what you believe is right. And if you can't do that, you can never inculcate that in your organization, because organizations don't fail because of competition or markets or macroeconomic conditions. They fail from within. And if you look at the book, Good to Great, and what happened to most of those companies, they failed because they failed from within. They never failed because of any of those other conditions. And I believe that's exactly true with any organization you build is, you will fail from within. And so really building the structure necessary to succeed and be an everlasting org requires the patience, but also the courage. So you have to let people express themselves. You still may make choices as leaders, but as long as people understand why, they'll do the right thing.
Yeah, and it's interesting the similarities between building a successful, thriving corporation and building a successful and thriving career. Starting with strength and courage as a leader, that also can be paired back to the individual. And I'll comment again on the fortitude you were taught in moving without knowing where you were going. Moving 7 times in your childhood, moving to the United States on your own at the time, moving from Philadelphia to Chicago for opportunity, and now you commute California back home. That solid, strong foundation. I can name many more people who would not do that than people who would. And the fact that you transitioned and made choices about your career based on, I want to continue to learn. I want to keep moving forward. You had fear in the rearview mirror. It wasn't something that was factored into your decision. So I encourage those individuals who are truly looking to drive and own your own career to think about that as develop your strong foundation, develop that internal fortitude. It doesn't mean everyone has to move and do the cross commute like you have, but instill that courage and strength and know that you can and you should speak to what you believe in, and you can and should represent what you believe in, and always add more value, right? Always continue to be the person that is highlighted for great work, great productivity, great team involvement, raising that ship to higher ground.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No,
Interesting. Interesting times. So you spend so much time in Abbott, and Abbott's known from the outside as a pretty conservative, obviously very profitable organization. How did someone with your background, with where you came from, how would you counsel others to have that kind of growth? Because you really were moved around every year to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and opportunities, and did so many different things with the company. What was that intentional, or were there ways that you would suggest others gather that kind of experience in their career?
No, absolutely. So large corporations are like countries. They operate with structures that could seem bureaucratic to some extent, but also structures that have really made them robust over time and also meaningful over time in the market. Abbott's no different, right? Abbott's a very strong culture. It can be a tough culture too, for folks who come from the outside. What I learned in my first stint at Abbott was the fact that, I learned all the tools about operating at Abbott. I learned how to find the next job. I learned how to really find a new mentor. I learned how to connect across the different kind of horizontals at Abbott, be it marketing, be it sales, be it, regulatory quality, and so on. And those things helped me when I kind of left Abbott and went elsewhere. And I was able to refine, some of the attributes that are required when you are working in a large company. So when I went to Beckman Coulter, for example, it seemed like a mini Abbott. It didn't seem like Abbott because, I was able to kind of really build partnerships at the C-suite very early. And what drove that was just understanding how companies operate, how organizations operate, and how decisions get made. It's very important as young leaders that you're not looking for it for personal gain. You're looking for it to drive kind of the business forward. Personal gain, always happens when you least expect it. Like they say this about people with wealth, right? You're not looking for wealth, and which is why wealth finds you. You never want to do the same with how you think about your career. Your career is going to never be a straight line. If you ever believe that that's the case, you are select few privileged few who can actually have that upon themselves. And I think careers themselves are going to be undulating. You're going to come across certain curves that you never expected. But the power that of leadership is that you're able to identify those curves, you're able to make choices, and able to understand that every choice you make is going to be your risk and your consequence, right? And as long as you're willing to do those, you'll be successful. This is this is what helped me when I came back to Abbott, because I came back to Abbott to lead the organization I was in as a junior engineer. So I came back to lead and had people reporting to me, including my mentor, reporting back into me. And it was difficult for me initially. It was a little alien because while I'd led with absolutely panache, elsewhere, it was very difficult to do the same coming back and really having, in my team, the leaders who actually I used to look up to, right? And now they look up to you. And I must thank every one of them because they were so respectful and so willing to take this reversal in roles. But what I learned was, in order for my organization to succeed, because I came back to lead a pretty large organization and build out new businesses. So Abbott at that time was a traditional big box business. So, you'd build these big instruments that get put into labs. And, I was chartered to come in and really help figure out how we would actually do more robotics. We'd do lab automation and then build informatics or software on top of it so that we could basically have the entire stack. And we went about doing it, both organically and inorganically. And inorganically, we went and purchased two companies, one in Milan, Italy, and one in Germany, to be able to really kind of build out and add these bolt-on acquisitions. But to do all of that, I had to go and really operate at a level I hadn't been exposed to before, which was really directly in the C-suite with some of Abbott's, senior most leaders, including the CEO. And the one thing I learned through this whole process was, it is, while you could sell, to customers, and you could sell to external entities, and that is usually a difficult proposition. It's sometimes harder to sell new ideas and new business models internally, and it requires leaders with a lot of courage themselves to be able to do it. And Abbott had that, and so we went and created a new business called Professional Services, where we were able to now wrap around informatics and provide intelligent thoughts. So think about it as a management consulting firm within Abbott that would consult with customers. And to do all of this, you build the muscle memory as a leader to kind of influence. And influence, you never want to influence up necessarily directly as much as influence horizontally with your peers. And so I built enough momentum peers upwards so that decisions got easier to be had. And those decisions weren't just for the benefit of my organization. They were for the broader benefit of the company. And that's the way I've always looked at it. I don't believe that I have to pitch for my organization's success alone in a company. I must pitch for the entire company's success. And if I do that, well, the organization, by virtue of delivering and executing, would be equally recognized. And, I've been lucky, the organizations have. So
I can see it. I've seen it with your career and your growth and the impact you've made over businesses, and that philosophy of putting the organization first, then the team, then the individual. We stick to that here in our company at the Mullings Group as well, because there's going to be points where you're not on the same page with your peer, your counterpart, even your supervisor. However, if you step back and say, okay, let's talk about what is in the best interest of the organization, it's interesting how things can start to line up. And then you start looking at data and looking at the associated values and what your change recommendations could mean. And look, then it became a successful part of the business, So right. No, that's excellent. So as a leader, of course, we don't always have great days and sunshine and rainbows, right? So what's I'm sure you were thrown a curveball of your career. Anything that you would say is one of the most I don't
Yeah.
know, challenging times that you had as a leader?
Yeah, well, I have so many. It's interesting. I kind of no longer view it as a challenge. You know, when you're in it, you sometimes you personalize it too much. But I'll tell you one interesting one. So over the years in a company, I had the opportunity to build a very novel proposition and thesis for a business. Um, I I believed I championed for it enough that I should get that role. And the reason I bring that up is because most young leaders and senior leaders believe that, have that sense of entitlement. And I did. I truly believed like I should be entitled for it. The company didn't believe that. I did. And so over time, we saw a multitude of leaders come in trying to lead this business that for which the original thesis was mine. Um, I struggled initially. I honestly did struggle with the fact that, I felt this was my baby and someone else was going to grow this baby and perhaps couldn't care for it as much as I could. Um, but I also realized it was a teaching moment that, at that point I really didn't understand. And it's one of those things where looking back, you really understand the value of that teaching moment. That teaching moment for me was the fact that, for everything I said about organizational success, at that moment, I'd made it my own, and I believe that as a leader, you must not make it your own. You must see the broader aspects of business because sometimes those can bring the way I could have conducted myself in terms of really it wasn't about helping and so on. That was natural; it would come, but innately feeling that this is mine not always the right emotion to have, and it's natural, it's human, I get it, but it's not the right emotion to have. And I believe that over time I've now realized that come another situation like this, my first order of business and my first loyalties would be towards my people and the organization and then me, and not that other way around, because I feel the other way around, clouded judgment. I had the opportunity to see failure, but I felt that also, while I displayed courage, I didn't act in the way that I naturally believe I should as a leader, and and that's been a harsh lesson. Um, I've been given some really interesting challenges. I've been asked to launch a product that was on just a concept on a piece of paper in 2 years with a specific launch date, and a team that is still learning how to launch product, and we did it. And kudos to the team for having for having really put up on that hell ride with me. But what it does show to me, that sort of a curveball, was that sometimes the theory of constraints is really how you have to operate a business in the global world, right? I mean, you're not going to get every tool, you're not going to get every resource that you want. You're not going to get every situation work your way. That particular program, everything that could go wrong happened. If you think about throwing in the kitchen sink and at all, everything happened. And yet that team came across winning. And what I would say was the attribute of that team is the never give up aspect, and the fact that they saw a unified view of how to really, you know, prove everyone wrong, right? Because they weren't, we our rallying cry was, if we do this, we would make the history books in some ways, right?
Mhm.
And we did it. And the real kudos they got was that a future Nobel Prize winner, who wasn't a Nobel winner at that time, wrote them a personal note, and sent it to me and said kudos to the team, because when I saw, what the product was a year ago, to where it is today, I never believed you guys would make it, and the fact you did was great.
Wow, that's pretty remarkable. That's pretty remarkable. Yeah. There's so many pieces of that, though, I want to make sure that are hit home. You've had so many wins that are visible on the outside, but there are so many punches, kicks, We can say losses, we can say negative outcomes, we can say whatever they are. But what I hear from you consistently is you internalize it as a lesson. You take that with you and that outcome and learn from it, and it makes you better for the next time. It makes you a better decision maker. It makes you a better leader, a better engineer, whatever that might be. So that's powerful stuff, and I give you a lot of credit for going through it and sharing it with us. And so let's jump to Truvian, because I think that this is just such a fascinating organization. Tell us what brought you there.
I've been in big box diagnostics for quite a few years. I've built all the systems that work in central labs today, in the Quest, the LabCorps of the world. And these are great systems. They centralized and operationalized, blood testing. But blood testing today is still very friction laden. There's, if you think about it, 40% of the American population does not adhere to a blood test order. They don't make it to a blood test order. Almost 50% of the U.S. population, and that's in fact true rest of the world as well. Probably it's growing at a more alarming rate. Are walking around with some sort of chronic disease, and they're a ticking time bomb. And a lot of these are non-communicable diseases, right? So, the cardiovascular disease, the glucose-related disease, and so on. And the reason for all of that is the friction that exists in blood testing today. There's obviously the overhang of, having, had companies that have failed in this space. But what brought me to Truvian was the fact that blood testing, or just healthcare in general, the reason I'm in it is because it's a fundamental human right. It's a birthright for humans to really get access to affordable healthcare, and yet it's only available to a privileged few. North America is a lot better than the rest of the world, but the Nordics have done to some extent, but it's just in pockets that healthcare is accessible and affordable. And Truvian has built a device that we believe, and we just shared it at a recent industry conference for the first time, that we could actually take 3 different instruments that exist in the central labs of today, like a Quest or a LabCorp, put it into an instrument no bigger than a desktop computer, and actually run large testing panels that can basically test for a multitude of disease states. And I wanted to be able to do that. This could be one of the the last few kind of engineering hands-on projects I ever did, and I wanted to make something happen. I believe that the old world, and I call it the old world because the world's flat today, but it's still the old world. Everything happens at the end of a street. In India, we call that a nukkad, which really means the end of the street. And that's where people congregate. That's where people fall in love. That's where people have fights. That's where the pharmacy is. And I want to be able to be there at every street corner in the world with a product like ours, being able to actually make access to healthcare possible. And over time, really be able to get a significant percentage of the world's population tracking their own health, because when we do that, and when we become educated consumers of health, healthcare costs will drop. Healthcare costs aren't going to drop if we are irrational users of healthcare, and we are, including in the United States. And what that results in is more kind of chronic disease. So it's basically secondary and tertiary care, and those are usually where expense is the highest. So I'm hoping, and I'm really, I'm very, very convinced that a product like ours will surely be game changing for the world.
It sounds like it. And I love the, thinking back again to the early days of in vitro diagnostics and the real estate that it would take in a hospital. And this is such a small, low profile system. It could go clinics, pharmacies. It has the portability to rest of world as well. That's really fascinating. That's great. Well, I'm so glad that we got the opportunity to chat about it. Just last thoughts on industry. Anything that you're really excited about in terms of big picture? Can be related to diagnostics or not. Anything that you're following? Since I know you don't sleep, you read all the time, and you're constantly learning. When your 65-pound puppy isn't jumping in your lap, that is.
Yeah. No, I think the world's going to need a lot of digital twins across healthcare to really make us successful. The scale at which we have to really dispense healthcare around the world, you can't do it. You can't do it with the models of today, right? I mean, there's models of today around product design and delivery. There's models today around kind of public policy. All of that needs to really change dramatically. But I think, areas where I feel, obviously there's momentum today, but really needs to be observed more closely is around really how do you garner the power of computing, the power of knowledge, what we call AI today, and really be able to create enough physicians, enough medical practitioners, and enough medical devices that can actually support, the entire population of the world. It's impossible that, you can't have enough doctors graduating every year and enough med techs and so on to be able to do this. So I feel like, the world's coming to an interesting point where decisions need to be made at a more broader healthcare context, and those decisions must not be about pockets of public policy or pockets of even economic and world policy. I think it's going to need to be where like groups come together and really solve for it. The World Health Organization is a great example, right? I mean, they have fought righteously for healthcare to be dispensed, but that scale at which they're able to do it is still not sustainable. As the populations of the world increase, and so I feel that's where I think every healthcare leader, every healthcare individual contributor must really think about how they can create more value. And sometimes value is created by people quitting their jobs and starting new enterprises that create sustainable value. And I think I'd encourage everybody, who's participating and listens to the power curves. Like power curve is that like, look, there's a great opportunity in healthcare today, be it in a large company or be it, independently. Go seek it out, make it your own, and be mission driven, because at the end of the day, you're in the best business. In the business of really, saving people's lives and helping people lead better lives. And so, what better business could you be in, right? So,
Couldn't have said it better. You definitely you nailed it with that one, and I love the idea of the trends continuing with more clinical insight and focus than ever
right.
before. The last few years we saw this big influx of tech going into
Mhm.
healthcare, and now with the way the last year has been, frankly, it's been a bit of a cleansing, and we're seeing a return to clinical need driving technology usage versus the other way around. And I think we're really our best days are ahead in that area. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well said.
Jay, listen, I could speak with you forever, and I promise that the next time it's over dinner or a glass of wine or something, and I can't wait to do it again. But thank you so much for being with us today on the Power Curve.
Thanks a lot, Holly. It's wonderful chatting. Take care.
Thank you. And to
Bye
our
bye.
audience, thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time. This is Holly Scott.